All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are unpacking some source material that tackles some incredibly profound, really heavy work, breaking the cycle of generational anxiety. Listen, if you're a parent who's doing the exhausting, largely invisible heavy lifting of trying to raise your kids differently than how you were raised, well, the insights we're about to explore are built specifically for you. A mother sitting in a therapist's office holding her sleeping infant shared this exact sentiment. And honestly, maybe you've felt this too, right? You make this silent vow to never yell, to never frighten your child, but then a totally normal toddler moment happens, a spilled cup of milk, and suddenly it feels like you're trying to defuse a bomb. You feel this inexplicable, terrifying surge of rage, and you literally have to walk out of the room just to avoid doing exactly what you promised you wouldn't do. It leaves you feeling profoundly exhausted and just filled with shame. You start thinking, I'm terrified I'm going to ruin them. But the research we're exploring today has a really clear message for you. You are not failing.
Which brings us to the absolute most critical question we can ask here. Why? Why does parenting trigger our own unhealed childhood wounds so intensely? Why does a spilled glass of milk feel like a 5-alarm fire? To understand this, we've got to pivot away from personal shame and actually look at the mechanics of the human nervous system.
Look, you love your kids fiercely. That's a given. But unresolved fears often act as this sort of invisible script for daily anxiety. By reacting through the lens of our old wounds, we unknowingly trap the next generation in our own shadows. So today, we're going to learn exactly how to identify these emotional triggers, understand the biology behind them, and finally, sever the bonds of generational trauma so you can rewrite your family's legacy.
Section 1. The Vow in the Dark. When we talk about cycle breaking, we're talking about a conscious, deliberate, and let's be honest, often very painful process. You're identifying inherited toxic patterns, things like emotional neglect or conditional love, and actively choosing to parent differently. But the source material makes a really vital distinction here. Cycle breaking isn't about being a perfect parent who never loses their patience. In plain terms, it's simply the decision to be the dam that stops the flood. It's absorbing the pain of the past so your kids don't have to carry it.
Now, to be that dam, the research points to a term called parental dysregulation. Basically, this is a state where a parent's nervous system is just totally overwhelmed by stress. The emotional brain completely hijacks the rational brain. What does that mean in real life? It means when your toddler is just being a normal, messy toddler, it triggers an unhealed wound in you, and suddenly you aren't reacting as a capable adult anymore. You're reacting as a terrified child yourself.
Section 2. The Biology of Inherited Trauma.
Okay, let's get into the science for a second because it's absolutely fascinating. Trauma is actually physically transmitted. Researchers call this transgenerational transmission of trauma, or TTT. If you were raised by a dysregulated parent, the data shows your nervous system was literally wired for hypervigilance. Research highlights how this alters the HPA axis, which is basically your body's stress response system. We see lower baseline cortisol levels but incredibly high glucocorticoid receptor sensitivity. We even see epigenetic marks, like DNA methylation on the NRC41 gene, which actively suppresses gene transcription. I know that's a lot of science, but here's the takeaway. Your body learned on a cellular level that connection equals danger. So when your child cries, your biology fires off a massive alarm bell. And hey, if you feel alone in this, consider this staggering number, 26%. Studies estimate that 26% of children aged 0 to 16 have a mother with a diagnosed anxiety or depressive disorder. This really illustrates the massive, societal scale of this challenge. We are talking about an entire generation of parents trying to rewrite biological scripts they never asked for.
Section 3. Spotting the shadow response.
So, the literature contrasts two distinct states you might bounce between. First is the shadow response. This is when you're reacting to historical wounds. You might feel physical cues like chest tightness, a sudden emotional flatness, or this intense, irrational urgency during a super minor conflict. You're basically managing past trauma. Conversely, you have the present response. This is when you're grounded, identifying and responding to your child's actual, current needs in the moment. Learning to distinguish between these two, that is the hardest but absolutely most vital part of the work.
Now, for a lot of driven parents, this shadow response kinda sneaks in wearing the costume of a parenting philosophy. The source material gives us two really distinct examples here. First, we see hypervigilant over-control. Take Jamie, for instance, a successful attorney who micromanages absolutely every minute to artificially create stability, and she is just completely exhausted. Then on the flip side, there's anxious permissiveness. Think of parents like Taylor, a CEO who was raised by a really authoritarian parent. Terrified of traumatizing her own kids, she refuses to set any boundaries at all, which inadvertently creates total chaos. In both cases, they're parenting from their wounds, not their wisdom.
Section 4. Mapping your family patterns.
Okay, so how do we map all this out? The best tool experts suggest is something called a genogram. It goes way beyond your standard family tree to actually map out emotional dynamics. By charting this out visually, you can instantly spot intergenerational conflict styles, emotional cutoffs, unresolved trauma, and patterns of enmeshment or distance. It massively speeds up the healing process because it gives you that true aha moment. You stop guessing why you react a certain way, and you start seeing the literal, inherited blueprint you are actively trying to remodel.
Section 5. The parental pause. The absolute cornerstone of disrupting this whole cycle is what researchers call parental reflective functioning, or PRF. This is a parent's capacity to step back, understand their own mental state, understand their child's mental state, and recognize how those emotions are driving behavior. PRF is basically your ultimate superpower. It's the protective buffer against passing on your own distress to your kid.
And this concept becomes incredibly clear when we look at studies on displaced families in war zones. While the data models might seem complex, the takeaway is so simple. When a parent's reflective functioning is low, their stress directly causes distress in the child. But when PRF is high, that indirect pathway completely breaks down. The parent's self-awareness literally shields the child from absorbing distress, even in the middle of extreme trauma. It is literal mathematical proof that your self-awareness protects your child. How amazing is that? So the big question. How do we actually build that PRF in the heat of the moment? The source material points to the parental pause, outlined in 3 very tactical steps. Step 1, notice the trigger. Feel that chest tightness or that sudden surge of rage. Step 2, step away to regulate your own nervous system. Listen to me, this is absolutely crucial. Stepping away is a clinical necessity. It is not a parenting failure. You cannot co-regulate a child if you are dysregulated yourself. So take 5 minutes. Step 3, return as a safe, regulated parent to respond.
Section 6. Building cycle-breaking families.
According to clinical frameworks, there are 3 main pillars you need to build to replace those old toxic scripts. First, you shift from conditional to unconditional worth, meaning love is no longer something they have to earn through compliance. You completely separate the child's behavior from their core identity. Second, from secrecy to transparency. No more of that "we don't talk about that" stuff. You prioritize age-appropriate truth, and you model accountability. And third, from enmeshment to autonomy. You respect your kids as totally separate beings. You allow them to have their own, yes, inconvenient feelings, especially when those feelings are directed right at you.
Now, going against the grain of your own nervous system to build these pillars, it's incredibly hard. That's why the both-and framework is so vital here. Society always wants things in binary terms, but the truth is, you are profoundly exhausted by the constant self-monitoring, and you are literally changing the trajectory of your family's history. You have complex trauma, and you are fully capable of providing safety right now. Both are absolutely true.
If there is literally only one thing you take away from this entire explainer, let it be this. Perfection isn't required to break the cycle. Repair is. You're going to mess up. You will accidentally repeat a toxic pattern at some point. The difference between a toxic parent and a cycle breaker is that the cycle breaker acknowledges the rupture, they apologize without making excuses, and they come back into connection. The repair is where the cycle actually ends.
You are doing the most important work of your life right now. You are doing the heavy lifting so that the pain stops with you. So I want to leave you with this final thought to carry with you today. When your child spills their milk tomorrow and that old alarm bell rings in your chest, will you be the flood or the dam?